I was sitting on the couch, staring at the blank wall in front of me, my hands resting on my lap, mind numb. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was deafening, louder than it had ever been before. It wasn't the silence that got to me, it was the weight of it. The kind of silence that fills the air when you've realized everything you've known, everything you've believed in, is a lie. It had been a strange few weeks, but I couldn't pin down exactly why. My name is Alex, and for the past 3 years, I've lived a life that I thought was predictable, safe, comfortable. And yet, today, this moment, everything felt off. I looked at my phone. There was a text message from my wife, Ellie. It was only one line, but it felt like it was written in a foreign language. Something so simple, yet it made my stomach twist. I'm not your property. I'll be late. Don't call. I blinked. I read it again. And again. The words didn't make sense to me. Sure, we'd had our disagreements, small arguments here and there. But this was a slap in the face. Was this a joke? A misunderstanding? Or was this her way of saying something that had been brewing beneath the surface for months? I'd never seen her like this. It had been a long time since Ellie and I had been on the same page. We weren't like we used to be, but I didn't know how to fix it. Maybe we were both too afraid to face what was happening between us. But that message, it hit a nerve I didn't even know I had. I looked at my phone for a few more seconds, trying to gather my thoughts. There was no apology, no explanation, just a cold declaration. I'm not your property. What did she mean by that? What had I done to deserve this? My mind raced, spinning out of control, trying to make sense of everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The distant behavior, the late nights at work, the subtle shifts in how she looked at me, like I wasn't even there. But this message? This was the confirmation I'd been subconsciously avoiding. Without thinking, I typed my reply. It was simple, but it felt like the only thing I could say at that moment. I'm not your husband anymore. Don't come back. I pressed send, my heart pounding in my chest. The words were harsh, but I couldn't stop myself. I was angry, hurt, but mostly I was tired. Tired of pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. 10 minutes passed. I didn't move. I didn't check my phone. I sat there, staring at the ceiling, my mind numb to everything around me. But then my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting another message from her, some kind of explanation, or maybe even an apology. Instead, it was a call. Ellie. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. The notifications piled up, 5, 10, 15, until the missed calls were nearing 20. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't sure if it was the shock of the message, the years of silence, or the realization that everything I had tried to hold on to was slipping through my fingers. But I wasn't going to answer. Not anymore. I wasn't going to be her backup plan, her emotional punching bag, or the guy who waited around for crumbs of attention. This was it. This was the moment I finally let go. But as I sat there, watching the missed calls rack up, something inside me started to twist. Because even though I was angry, no, furious, I couldn't deny that a small part of me wanted to pick up that phone. To hear her voice. To hear her explanation. I wanted to believe it wasn't too late. But deep down, I knew it was. As I stared at the phone, the seconds dragging on like hours, I realized something that chilled me to the core. I hadn't felt this detached from her in years. It wasn't just the message, it wasn't just the silence, it was everything. In that moment, I could feel the vast gulf that had slowly formed between us, invisible but undeniable. The kind of distance that didn't need words to exist, it just was. It wasn't always like this. When we first met, Ellie was everything I had ever dreamed of. Smart, ambitious, funny, the kind of woman who lit up a room the second she walked in. I used to love how she'd laugh at my jokes, even the ones that weren't that funny, and how she would make me feel like I was the only person who mattered when she looked at me. But somewhere along the way, we lost that spark. I could feel it happening, but I couldn't stop it. The late nights at work became later, the texts became fewer, the smiles turned into polite nods. It was like we were two strangers sharing the same space, and neither of us knew how to fix it. I had tried. God, I had tried. I'd made the effort to plan date nights, to ask her how her day was, to be there when she needed me. But every time, I felt like I was getting nothing in return. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the quiet exhaustion that never seemed to lift. She wasn't happy, and I couldn't fix it. But why did it have to come to this? Why the coldness, the harshness of that message? "I'm not your property," she'd said. What did that even mean? Did she feel trapped? Or was this just the culmination of everything that had gone unsaid between us for so long? My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was another call. Ellie. I didn't need to see her name on the screen to know who it was. The thought of picking up made my stomach turn, but at the same time, I felt this strange pull, like a magnet, drawing me back into the situation. Maybe she was calling to apologize. Maybe she'd had a change of heart. But deep down, I knew the truth. Apologies wouldn't fix this. The damage was done. I'd known it for a while, but now it was too late to pretend otherwise. I let it ring out, watching the missed call count rise with each passing moment. The phone buzzed again, this time a text message from her. I almost didn't want to look, but my fingers betrayed me. I unlocked the phone and read it. "Why aren't you picking up? Are you really going to do this?" It wasn't the words themselves that hit me, it was the tone, the urgency, the frustration. It was like she was pleading with me, but for what? What did she want me to do? I wasn't the one who had been neglecting our relationship. I wasn't the one who had pulled away. But there she was, blaming me. It was all so backwards. I felt the anger rise again, that familiar burn in my chest. The anger that I had been suppressing for so long, thinking it would go away if I just ignored it. But now, with every text, every missed call, I realized how deep the resentment had grown. It wasn't just about the message anymore. It was everything leading up to it. The late nights, the lies, the way she looked through me like I wasn't even there. It was like I had been invisible in my own marriage. I typed a response, trying to keep my cool, but the words just came out. "I'm done, Ellie. Don't call me again." I pressed send, my thumb lingering on the screen. Was I being too harsh? Maybe. But at that moment, I didn't care. I had to be firm. I had to put my foot down. If I didn't, she would keep walking all over me, and I was sick of it. I sat back, trying to calm the storm inside me, but it wasn't easy. The anger was still there, bubbling beneath the surface. But now, there was something else too. A quiet realization that I had just made a choice. A choice that I never thought I would have to make. But here I was. And I was free. The phone rang again, but this time, I didn't even bother looking. I just turned it face down and let it buzz against the table. I was done. Done being the passive, apologetic husband who bent over backwards to make things work. Done with the emotional manipulation. Done with the empty promises. For once in my life, I was choosing me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight in my chest began to lift. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. No more chasing. No more pretending everything was okay. This was the beginning of something new, even if I didn't know exactly what that would look like. But I would figure it out. I had to. The silence in the house felt deafening, but strangely, it was exactly what I needed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't trying to appease someone else. I wasn't walking on eggshells, hoping that whatever I did would make things better between us. I could breathe again, but that didn't stop my mind from racing. I was sitting in the living room, phone in hand, staring at the countless missed calls and texts from Ellie. Each new notification felt like another thread pulling me deeper into this mess, but I wasn't ready to pull myself out. Not yet. I needed to let the dust settle, to figure out what had been building for so long, and why I had stayed silent for so many years. Maybe this was the universe's way of pushing me to face the truth. I glanced at the clock. 8:30 p.m. Ellie should have been home by now. She hadn't been home at all, though. That was nothing new. She was always working late or out with friends. At least, that's what I had been telling myself. But now, with the message she sent earlier, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. She had been gone for so long that the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt empty, like a shell I was occupying, just waiting for something to crack open. I picked up the phone and unlocked it again. Her name popped up once more, this time with a message that read, "I need to explain. Please, just pick up the phone." I stared at it for a few seconds, reading it over and over. Part of me wanted to respond, to hear her side of things, to find out why she felt the need to send that first text, the one that had shattered everything between us. But another part of me, the part that was finally standing up for myself, felt a sense of calm. I was done. There was no need to hear her excuses. This had gone on long enough. I tossed the phone on the coffee table and leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. The thoughts kept swirling in my head. What had gone wrong? Or had we lost each other? Had it been me all along? Was I too passive, too willing to let things slide, to make her the center of my universe while I faded into the background. I hadn't realized it then, but that was exactly what had happened. I'd spent years trying to make her happy, doing everything I could to be the good husband, the one who never complained, who always forgave, who always put her first. But in the process, I had lost myself. I had allowed her to take me for granted, to make me feel invisible in my own life. And the worst part? I let it happen. I ignored all the red flags, all the warning signs, because I thought love was about sacrifice. But in reality, it was about respect, and I had stopped getting that from her a long time ago. I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting off my chest as I realized how much I had been holding on to, how much I had been sacrificing without even realizing it. I had let myself believe that I needed her, that my life wouldn't be complete without her. But now I knew the truth. I could survive without her. I could even thrive. The phone buzzed again. Another text. Another call. But this time, I didn't care. I didn't care what she had to say. She had made her choice when she sent that first message, and now I was making mine. It wasn't easy. I won't lie. The thought of Ellie, my wife, out there somewhere, dealing with whatever she was dealing with, didn't sit right with me. I could have been the man who fought for her, the one who showed up and demanded answers. But I realized I didn't need to fight for someone who didn't even see me anymore. I was done being the last choice, the backup plan. And deep down, I knew that if I gave her another chance, I'd just fall back into old patterns. I'd be that passive, apologetic guy again, willing to do anything to avoid confrontation. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I had learned something valuable about myself tonight. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. The house was still quiet. So quiet, in fact, that it felt like I was the only one left here. I thought about what I would do next. I didn't know yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had options. I didn't have to follow the same old script, the one where I waited around for her to fix things. No, I was going to write my own story from here on out. I set the glass down, grabbed my jacket, and left the house. I didn't have a destination in mind. I wasn't running away from anything. I was just giving myself space. Space to breathe, to think, to realize that this was the beginning of something new. Maybe it was scary. Maybe it was uncertain. But I was ready for it. For once, I wasn't looking for approval. I wasn't waiting for someone to give me permission to live my life. I was doing it on my own terms. And nothing was going to stop me now. The cool night air hit me like a rush of clarity as I stepped outside. The streetlights flickered faintly in the distance, casting long shadows on the sidewalk as I made my way down the quiet street. My footsteps echoed in the stillness, a strange contrast to the chaos inside my mind. I didn't know where I was going, or even why I was walking, but I needed to be away from the house. I needed to put space between me and everything that had been suffocating me for far too long. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was breathing freely. I didn't want to think about Ellie. Not right now. Not after everything that had happened. But no matter how hard I tried to push her out of my mind, she kept creeping in. Her words, her face, the way she had pulled away from me, all of it was still fresh in my thoughts. Had I done the right thing by telling her I was done? Was this really the end? Or was I making a mistake I would regret forever? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my brain. I had to focus. I had to move forward. But the moment I stepped into the small cafe down the street, I knew my thoughts were going to have to wait. The warmth of the cafe hit me like a soft hug. It was a small, cozy place with dim lighting and a few people scattered around, lost in their own worlds. I grabbed a seat by the window, away from the crowd, hoping for a few moments of solitude. The barista, a woman with short dark hair, nodded at me as I sat down. I smiled back, though it felt more out of habit than anything else. I wasn't really here for the coffee. I wasn't really here for anything other than the escape. I ordered a drink, but before it even arrived, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Ellie. Why are you doing this? We need to talk. My hand clenched around the phone, and for a moment, I almost let myself cave. Almost. I stared at the message, considering calling her back, giving her the chance to explain herself. Maybe we could work it out. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was overreacting. But then, as I looked around the cafe, I realized that all of this, everything that had been happening, was so much bigger than just her and me. It was about me. About how I had lost myself in this relationship, How I had given so much of myself to someone who wasn't willing to do the same. How long had I been carrying this weight without even realizing it? As I sat there, that same sense of clarity came back to me, the feeling that I was finally seeing the truth. And the truth was that I didn't need her. Not anymore. I had spent so much time worrying about what she thought of me, what she needed, that I had completely forgotten to ask myself what I needed, what I wanted, what made me happy. And so, I made my choice. I wasn't going to fall back into the same trap, waiting for her to fix things, for her to decide what was best for both of us. I wasn't her project. I wasn't her backup plan. I wasn't going to be the guy who always waited around for a text or a call, hoping things would magically get better. No, I was going to take control. Before I could think twice, I hit send on my phone. A simple message, but it was final. We're done, Ellie. You've had your chance. It wasn't the kind of message I'd normally send. In fact, it was far harsher than anything I had ever said to her. But in that moment, it felt right. It felt like the first step towards reclaiming my life. My own life. I set my phone down and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I wasn't sure if I had made the right call, or if Ellie would even understand. But I knew one thing. I had finally done something for me. Just as I was about to take a sip of my coffee, the door to the cafe swung open, and I heard a voice behind me. Alex. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around, almost too quickly, and there she was, Ellie, standing in the doorway, looking as beautiful as ever, but with an expression on her face that I couldn't quite place. It was a mix of shock, hurt, and something else, something I couldn't read. Ellie, I said, my voice a little more strained than I expected. What are you doing here? She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes searching mine. I came to find you. I tried calling you, but you didn't pick up. I need to talk to you, Alex. Please, just listen. For a moment, I considered it. Maybe I should hear her out. Maybe we could figure this out. But as I looked at her, really looked at her, I realized that the person I had been trying to save for all these years wasn't the woman standing in front of me. It was the version of her that I had created in my mind, the woman I had hoped she would be. But the truth was staring me in the face now, clearer than ever. I wasn't the same person I was before. I wasn't the guy who would sit around, waiting for someone to change, waiting for someone to love him the way he deserved to be loved. I had learned that much tonight. No, I said quietly, my voice steady now. It's too late. Ellie's face fell, the shock on her face turning to something else, disbelief, maybe even anger. But I didn't care. I wasn't afraid anymore. I stood up slowly, meeting her eyes one last time. I'm done, Ellie. I'm done trying to fix something that's been broken for so long. And with that, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving everything behind. I walked out of the cafe, the door closing behind me with a soft jingle. The evening air was colder now, but it felt good, sharp, refreshing. Every step I took away from the cafe felt like a step further into the unknown. There was something liberating about it, the uncertainty, the freedom. I was no longer tethered to a life I didn't want anymore. The weight on my shoulders that I had been carrying for years, the weight of trying to fix something that wasn't mine to fix, had finally lifted. But even as I walked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping into my chest. I had made my choice. I had made it clear to Ellie, and yet there was still this lingering feeling inside me, a pit of doubt that I couldn't shake. Was I really doing the right thing? Was this the end of everything, or just the beginning of something worse? I didn't know. I didn't have all the answers, and for once, that was okay. I didn't need to figure everything out right now. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living a life that wasn't my own. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay when I wasn't. Ellie and I had been living in two different worlds for so long that the gap between us had become unbridgeable. I kept walking, my feet moving almost on their own, leading me down unfamiliar streets, until I found myself standing in front of a small bar. I hadn't planned to stop, but there was something about the flickering neon sign in the window that called to me. It was one of those dimly lit, no-frills kind of places, the kind that didn't try to be anything other than what it was. I needed that kind of simplicity right now, something uncomplicated, something that didn't require a decision or an explanation. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the sound of muted conversations and the clink of glass greeting me. The bartender, a man with a thick beard and a welcoming smile, nodded at me as I made my way to an empty seat by the window. It was quiet, and for the first time that night, I felt a sense of peace. There was no one here expecting anything from me. No one here to judge or demand answers. I could just exist. As I sat down, I felt the weight of the day catch up with me. The emotions that had been building, the anger, the hurt, and yes, even the relief, all seemed to settle into my bones. I ordered a drink, something simple, whiskey straight. It wasn't about getting drunk. It was about taking a moment for myself. For once, I wasn't worried about anyone else. I wasn't worried about what Ellie thought or how she would react. I wasn't worried about how things would turn out. I was just breathing. I took a sip of the whiskey, letting it burn as it went down. The warmth spread through me, and for a second, I thought maybe it was a mistake to leave everything behind. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe I should have fought for her. But no, I stopped myself before those thoughts could take root. I had fought for her, for us, for too long, and all it had gotten me was exhaustion and disappointment. The bartender slid my drink a little closer, and I gave him a small nod of thanks. I didn't want to engage in conversation. I didn't want to talk about Ellie or about what had happened between us. I didn't want to think about the consequences of what I had just done. All I wanted was a few minutes to clear my head. I needed to know what it felt like to be on my own again, without her, without the weight of the past hanging over me. But as I sat there, lost in my own thoughts, the door swung open again, and I heard a voice that made my heart skip a beat. Alex. I froze. There was no mistaking that voice. It was Ellie. She was standing at the door, looking around as if searching for something or someone. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. I could see the mix of emotions on her face: confusion, desperation, and something else that I couldn't quite place. She hadn't expected to find me here. Hell, I hadn't expected to find myself here. But here she was, standing in the doorway, looking lost. The bartender noticed her, too, and nodded in her direction. You know him? He asked casually. Ellie nodded, her gaze never leaving mine. Yeah, I do. She took a few tentative steps toward me, her eyes wide, a slight tremor in her voice. Alex, I didn't know where else to go. I needed to talk to you. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to stand up, to walk away, to keep moving forward. But something in the way she said my name made me hesitate. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, or maybe it was the fact that she had come all this way to find me. But in that moment, all I could do was sit there, silently, watching her approach. She sat down across from me, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come right away. Instead, she just looked at me, searching for something, anything. I couldn't tell if she was trying to apologize or if she was trying to find a way back to me, but it was clear that something had shifted. She wasn't the same Ellie I had known before. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For everything. For pushing you away, for making you feel like you didn't matter. I've been lost, Alex. I've been so caught up in my own world that I didn't even see how much I was hurting you. Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But then the memory of everything, the distance, the neglect, the coldness, came flooding back, and I knew that words weren't enough anymore. We had reached a point where apologies didn't matter. I appreciate the apology, I said, my voice steady. But it's too late. Ellie's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I had to be firm. I had to stay strong. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched mine. Please, Alex. Don't say that. We can fix this. We can try again. I pulled my hand away slowly. No, Ellie. We've had our chance. I've tried. But I can't keep doing this. Not anymore. For a long moment, she just stared at me, the pain in her eyes so raw that it almost made me question everything. But I couldn't. I couldn't let myself fall back into the same patterns. Not for her. Not for anyone. And as I stood up and walked out of that bar, leaving her behind, I knew one thing for certain. I was walking away from the past, and I wasn't looking back. The cold wind hit me as soon as I stepped out of the bar, a sudden shock that pulled me back into reality. My mind had been spinning ever since Ellie walked through the door, but now, standing on the street corner, I could feel the full weight of everything crashing down on me. I had just rejected her. In front of God and everyone else. I had turned my back on the woman I'd once loved. The woman who had spent years with me, and the one I had tried to build my life around. For a fleeting second, doubt crept in, like a whisper in the back of my mind. Had I done the right thing? Was this really the end? I shoved my hands into my pockets and walked away, the sound of my boots echoing through the empty street. It felt strange, this sense of freedom, as if I had just torn down a wall that had been suffocating me for so long. But at the same time, I felt an ache. Not the kind of ache you feel when you miss someone, but the kind that comes when you realize something that was once so important is now just gone. The life I had built with Ellie was over. The hope that one day things might get better gone. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself that this was the right choice, a part of me mourned what was lost. I walked for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. I wasn't going anywhere in particular. It wasn't about the destination. It was about putting one foot in front of the other, getting farther away from the mess I had left behind. My phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. I didn't even look at it. I knew it was Ellie. The calls and texts would keep coming. She was desperate to explain herself, to fix what I had already made clear couldn't be fixed. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I had given her all the chances I had in me. All those years of making excuses for her behavior. All those nights waiting for an apology that never came. I couldn't keep doing this. It wasn't healthy, and it wasn't love. I kept walking until I reached a park, one I hadn't been to in years. It was quiet, almost eerie, with only the faintest light from the street lamps flickering in the distance. The night was heavy, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees was the only thing that kept the silence from swallowing me whole. I sat down on a bench, taking a deep breath as I looked around. Everything felt different. The park, the city, it was like I was seeing it all through new eyes. Like I had just woken up from a long, painful sleep. The truth hit me harder than I expected. Ellie wasn't the person I had fallen in love with anymore, and neither was I. We had changed. We had both changed, but only one of us had bothered to face it. The other had been living in a fantasy, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I had tried to convince myself that if I loved her enough, things would go back to the way they used to be. But they never did. And now, here I was, standing on the other side of a life I didn't even recognize anymore. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, staring at the screen for a long time before I opened the messages. There were dozens of them. I had stopped reading them after the third one, but now I had to know. I had to see what she was saying. So, I read them one by one. Why are you doing this, Alex? I thought we were better than this. Please, just pick up. I swear I'll make it right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean what I said. I'm lost without you. Each message felt like another punch to the gut, but as I read them, something inside me hardened. These were just words, and words didn't mean anything anymore. If she had meant them, she would have shown it long before now. I wasn't the man who needed empty promises and apologies. I wasn't the man who would sit around and wait for someone who couldn't even make an effort. I deleted the messages without replying. It felt good. It felt empowering. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a say in it. I wasn't going to let my life be dictated by someone else's choices. I wasn't going to be the guy who looked back, regretting everything. I was done. The sound of my phone buzzing again pulled me back to the present, but this time, I didn't even flinch. I let it ring out. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left for me to fix. I had already let go. I stood up from the bench, feeling the chill in the air again. The weight in my chest had finally lifted. For the first time in months, I felt light. Free. I walked away from the park, my phone still buzzing behind me. It didn't matter anymore. I was no longer afraid. I wasn't afraid of being alone, and I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Because now, I knew that the only thing holding me back was myself. And I wasn't going to be the person who held myself hostage anymore. Whatever came next, I was ready. I woke up the next morning with an unfamiliar sense of clarity. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was suffocating under a mountain of questions and guilt. I had made a decision, and it felt like I had finally stepped into my own skin again. I wasn't sure where I was going from here, but at least I knew that whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. I sat up slowly, the silence in the room settling around me like a heavy blanket. I had spent so much time in my own head, obsessing over every little detail of my relationship with Ellie, trying to piece together what had gone wrong, what I could have done differently. But the truth was, I was done asking those questions. I wasn't going to torture myself anymore with thoughts of what-ifs. The past was the past. And now, all that mattered was the present. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city below. The streets were busy, people rushing to and fro, each of them caught up in their own lives, their own struggles. In a way, it felt like a reminder of how small I had made myself in the grand scheme of things. I had spent so much time catering to someone else's needs, making sure everyone else was happy, that I had completely forgotten to ask myself what I wanted. As the morning dragged on, I found myself wandering around the apartment, almost aimlessly. There was a strange emptiness in the air now, as if the space had somehow shifted without Ellie's presence. But it wasn't a bad emptiness. It was a space I had created for myself, a moment to breathe, a moment to exist without the weight of someone else's expectations hanging over me. It felt good, almost liberating. But even as I settled into this new chapter of my life, there was still a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the image of Ellie's face, standing in that cafe, her eyes full of pain, regret, and something else, something I hadn't seen before. It was like she was seeing me for the first time in a long while. Like she was realizing, in that moment, that I was no longer the person she could control. And that realization scared her. I knew she wasn't going to let me go that easily. People don't just disappear from your life without a fight, especially when they've been such a big part of it. And I knew that Ellie was going to come after me. She wasn't just going to let me walk away without trying to fix things. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't sure I wanted her to fix things. What if I wasn't the one who needed fixing? What if I was just fine on my own? The thought was both terrifying and freeing. It wasn't about vengeance or anger anymore. It was about self-preservation. It was about finally doing what was best for me, even if that meant walking away from everything I had known. The phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. I knew who it was without even looking. I didn't need to check. It was Ellie. The messages were getting more desperate now. Please, Alex. We can fix this. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. I could feel the pull, the urge to respond, to explain myself, to tell her everything I had been holding in for so long. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I deleted the message before I even had time to process it. I wasn't going to do this anymore. I wasn't going to keep playing this game where she got to control the narrative. It wasn't her story anymore. It was mine. The sun had moved across the sky by the time I finally decided to leave the apartment. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I needed to get out. I needed to take this new life I was building and start creating something that was truly mine. I was done being stuck in the past, done letting Ellie have a hold on me. I grabbed my jacket, headed out the door, and into the world waiting for me. The streets were crowded, full of people going about their daily lives, unaware of the battle that had just raged inside me. I couldn't help but feel a little invisible, in a way. But it didn't bother me. It was the kind of anonymity I needed. The kind of freedom that came with being just one person in a sea of many. I found a small park a few blocks from my place, and I sat down on one of the benches. The sound of children laughing and running in the distance was strangely comforting. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt like I was part of something bigger, something I had been missing. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down, knowing who it was without checking. Another message from Ellie. I can't lose you, Alex. Please. I need you. The words echoed in my mind, but they didn't have the same impact they once did. I had heard them so many times before. I had heard them in 100 different ways, each time followed by a promise to change, a promise to do better. But it had never lasted. And this time, it wouldn't either. I read the message one more time before I turned my phone off and slipped it back into my pocket. I wasn't going to keep running in circles. I wasn't going to keep trying to fix something that was beyond fixing. I wasn't going to let my life be dictated by someone who didn't even know who I was anymore. I wasn't going to be afraid of what came next. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. And nothing was going to take that away from me. The days that followed were a blur of quiet reflection and small steps forward. The silence that had settled over my life after that night in the park wasn't lonely, as I had feared. It was peaceful. It was my peace. I took walks in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years, simply because I wanted to. I started picking up old hobbies again, reading, painting, cooking. The simple things that I had neglected while trying to keep a relationship alive that had long since stopped serving me. I began to understand the power of solitude. It was healing in ways I couldn't have imagined. It wasn't the loneliness I had once feared. It was the realization that I had never needed someone else to complete me. I was whole on my own. A few weeks later, I ran into a couple of old friends at a cafe. It was a casual, almost accidental meeting, and I didn't think much of it at the time. But the conversation that followed was different. It felt light. It felt like I was reconnecting with parts of myself I had forgotten. They noticed the change in me before I did. "You're different," one of them remarked, smiling. "You seem happy." For the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't brush it off or hide behind a facade. I smiled back and nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." It wasn't just about the absence of pain anymore. It was about rediscovering the things that had made me feel alive before the weight of a strained relationship had buried them. I was becoming the person I had once been, but with more clarity, more strength, and an even deeper understanding of who I was. I had stopped defining myself by someone else's presence or absence, and started defining myself by my own actions and choices. As the months went on, I grew stronger. I found a new job that I loved, something I never would have pursued if I hadn't made that decision to walk away. I made new friends, I reconnected with family, and I filled my life with people and experiences that nurtured my growth, not hindered it. One evening, while sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset, I received a message from Ellie. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, and I had to admit, a small part of me was curious. The message was brief. "I've been working on myself. I hope you're doing the same." I stared at the message for a long time. The past wasn't completely gone, but it was no longer a heavy weight. I had let it go. And so, without any hesitation, I typed my response. "I am. Thank you." I hit send, and that was it. I didn't need to dwell on it. I didn't need to relive any old wounds. She had her path, and I had mine. We had both grown, and we had both moved on. There was no animosity, no longing for something that wasn't there anymore. We had both made peace with the past, and that was enough. As I sat back, feeling the warmth of the evening sun on my skin, I realized something important. Walking away from something that wasn't right for me wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of strength. I had finally taken control of my own life, and I was living it on my own terms. I had found peace, and in that peace, I found joy. I had rediscovered my own worth, and it felt like I had been reborn. The future was still unknown, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready. I had learned to embrace the journey, to trust that the choices I made would lead me where I needed to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the promise of a bright new chapter unfolding before me.